Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Planning in Volatile Times, How Golden Gate National Park's Conservancy Builds a Bridge to the Other Side. My name is Tracy Thompson, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we jump in, I'm just going to briefly go over how to use the webinar console. The orange arrow on the right will let you toggle the control tray open or closed. At the bottom of the control tray, you will see a chat window. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar for our presenters via the chat function. We will have a Q&A later, but if we don't get them to them today, be sure to respond to your webinar or your question after the webinar. For your audio settings, on your GoToWebinar console, you should see an area for audio settings. If you are calling in through your telephone, please choose the Use Telephone option. And if you are using your computer speakers, then select Use Mic and Speakers. Additionally, I would like to note that this webinar is going to be recorded. We will also send out slides as well as a link to the on-demand recording of the webinar within 48 hours. Please keep an eye out for this email if you are interested in viewing the webinar after today or sharing it with any of your colleagues who couldn't make it. We are also offering CPE with today's presentation. To qualify for CPE, you must use a personal computer, no smartphones, and log in with your own information and unique URL. You must be logged into our online software for at least 50 consecutive minutes within the scheduled time frame of the webinar. Actively respond to at least 75% of the polling questions and complete the evaluation survey at the end of the webinar. With that, I'd like to go into the learning objectives. Perfect. So some of the learning objectives of today's webinar is to discover how nonprofit peers are planning revenue and expense based on forecasted census, plan what-if scenarios to provide insight of considering various business options, examine current state and how to leverage system alternatives for planning, budgeting, and reporting, identify the system roll-up capabilities for faster consolidation process, solve drill-through capabilities to research variances and the root cause of data anomalies. So our agenda today is some introductions. We have an Adaptive Insights nonprofit overview, trends in nonprofit, Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy success story, and then a short demo at the end. I'd like to introduce our presenters today. We have Amy Morgan, a Director of Consulting from Armanino, Brenda Collar, Senior Management, Nonprofit Client Engagement at Armanino, Chris Shea, the Nonprofit Director of Planning and Analytics at Adaptive Insights, and J. Mark Jenkins, the Vice President of Finance and Analytics at Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. Now with that, let's get started. I'm going to pass it over to Chris for our first section.
Thank you, Tracy, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time today. First off, as a public company, Workday Adaptive Insights, a public company, anything that we show in the product today or any future statements, please make purchasing decisions based on what you see in the product as is seen today. To start off, Adaptive Insights was founded in 2004 by a CFO and Rob Hull. We have since grown and were recently acquired by Workday as a leader in corporate performance management. We have over 4,500 customers and a leader in the space, rated #1 for ease of use, accessibility, usability, and because of Workday, rated #1 on our Fortune 500 on Fortune's top 50 innovative companies in the future. We have over 4,500 customers, over 700 of which are nonprofit organizations, which is fantastic. We have a lot of joint Armanino Adaptive customers as well. We're very fortunate that J. Mark is going to talk to us about his experiences today, especially in these uncertain times. Other key marquee names as Monterey Bay Aquarium, California State Parks, great schools, among others. In today's environment, especially under the circumstances that we find ourselves in today, agility really is the key to organizational success. And unfortunately, for nonprofits in this environment, we are dealing with lots of uncertainty around funding, cost control, uncertainty in the future, which is leading our nonprofits and our organizations that are leveraging adaptive to be more nimble, more agile, ask questions of the future, ask questions of their organization now, to make sure that they maintain sustainability. And planning is really at the heart and center of strategy and execution. Unfortunately, in today's reality, departments and communications and the planning activities associated with budgeting, forecasting, reporting, and what if scenarios are done in siloed, very episodic situations, which I think is accentuated now where a lot of folks are working home remotely in either legacy on-premise systems where data is stored on laptops and CPUs, as well as Excel as a personal productivity tool to try and put together complex budgets, forecasts, scenario analysis, and driver-based models. This is really, really difficult to be dynamic, nimble, and react quickly in this environment using these tools. At Adaptive, we firmly believe in an active planning environment and are trying to get our customers in that direction. From a process standpoint, we feel that an active planning process has to be collaborative, comprehensive, and continuous. Collaborative in the fact that lots of key stakeholders need to communicate, collaborate real time with access to data that has integrity, that is real time, and that people trust. Comprehensive in terms of the power of the models, not being able to worry about scale or the amount of data or the amount of calculations or what if scenarios that are completed, and continuous, performing rolling forecasts or ongoing tests to their model and sensitivity analysis is really important for organizations to understand based on the conditions today, how are we going to get to our goals and measurements of the future. From a solution requirement standpoint, in order to meet the collaborative metric, the solution has to be easy to use, not just by core finance folks who are Excel savvy or technically savvy, but all departments and all stakeholders. It also has to be powerful. A very interesting statistic was spread around our organization today that since the COVID-19 crisis, the amount of what if scenarios and versions that were produced in the month of March grew 10 to 20 fold in comparison to normal times. That really speaks to the power of modeling, scenario analysis, and some of the elements that you're going to see today in the demonstration, as well as hear from J-Mark. And as well as fast to deploy and implement for time to value, but also a fast operating model so that you guys can get the data that you need at the right time with the right frequency. And Adaptive built a planning platform for everybody. As I mentioned, whether you're a program director or in marketing, operations, or the C-suite, everybody needs to have access to data that everybody believes in with a tool that they can use easily and share information across and collaborate together. And Adaptive truly has built a planning platform for all of our customers. Adaptive will always be a solution that is system agnostic. It doesn't matter what ERP or data source we want to integrate into our solution. Adaptive will always be a best-in-class standalone performance management suite for budgeting, forecasting, reporting, and modeling. And also, after the acquisition of Workday, our budgeting platform is embedded into Workday's suite of products so that there's a continuous plan, execute, and analyze communication within the suite. And year over year, including this year, Adaptive is a leader in the Magic Quadrant, rated by Gartner. And again, #1 for ease of use, ease of implementation, and accessibility. So with that, I will hand it over to Amy.
Actually, we have our first polling question. So for those of you CPE, make sure to answer these questions here. First one we got is, what did you want to gain in this webinar? Please select one. Information on cash forecasting, improving a budget process, what if scenarios, and understanding best practices. And thanks, Chris. That was great information. So just as a reminder, just answer at least 75% to get CPE. Give the audience a few more seconds here. All right, if we can show the results, please. Awesome, looks pretty even around the board there. Does any of our presenters have any comments on this?
No, I think it sounds good. We're going to cover all of these, so we're happy to see that it's pretty evenly split.
Great. And with that, I will hand it over to Brenda.
Awesome. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to cover some trends in nonprofit. Has anybody noticed anything going on lately? So of course, the first trend we're going to talk about is crisis management. That's what's on everybody's minds right now, is how, as all of our programs are focusing on how to save the programs, in finance, we're often the only one focused on how to deal with cash forecasting. So hopefully you all have formed some sort of crisis management team, and you're looking at what if scenarios. If you haven't done it yet, it's really hard, but you got to figure out what that worst case scenario is, because you have to have that, a plan for that at least as well. So your what if scenarios are very important. Cash flow forecasting in an environment like this where you're not sure, the one thing we are sure of is that the 2020 budget you thought you were going to have is out the window. And so cash flow forecasting becomes a lot more important about the timing of when you're going to receive those revenues, making sure AR is as small as possible, and minimizing expenses to make sure that you can meet your cash flow needs. A lot of us have experienced some disruption with adjusting fundraising events, having to cancel them or change the format to move them to virtual. We've had a lot of clients doing things like online auctions, or other fundraising events, going back to donors and asking them, if they cancel an event, if they can keep that ticket price as a donation, which of course changes the tax status of that favorably for the donor as well, because they can now deduct that full amount. And talking with the funders and really getting that perspective, to what extent are they able to double down on their grant, or give you any more lenient reporting requirements, knowing that you're not on premises and that things are very different. So working with your funders to talk about the timing, or if you have pledges out there, seeing if they're still feasible to collect. So all of that's going to go into your what if scenarios, your cash flow forecasting, and the discussions you're having internally with both management and your boards. On top of the crisis management, there's other things that are going on, technological advances. We now have an entire workforce that is sheltering in place and working from home. With that brings a lot of challenges, both from a hardware and a software perspective. You might have staff that don't have laptops, that are working off of desktops, and what that virtual office looks like. Ooh. I don't know what happened there.
Did it go forward for you?
It did go forward. I wanted to go back. I was still talking about the last slide. Something happened.
Jessica, can you take control and go back, please?
Yeah, like my whole screen just
There you go.
I'm right as I'm talking about technological advances, I'm having technical difficulties, as if that isn't apropos enough there. And so, you know, making sure that people are connecting secure devices if you're allowing them to use network resources on a personal computer of some sort. Being able to take advantage of any sort of technology that you have, AI, machine learning, office hours, you know, tools like WebEx and Zoom, and looking at chief data analytics officer, like how are you warehousing all of your data and how does it integrate together? Adaptive is usually a piece of that, and that's usually going to be some sort of, you know, data, you know, business intelligence tool that can help pull it all together and think about how you're warehousing your data. Cost management, as well as value and pricing. So lots of trends going on. So here at Armanino, we also have a crisis management team. We have a firm-wide one as well as a special subsection for the nonprofit industry. And as a result of that, since we've been all hands on deck for the last couple of weeks, we've been able to put together a lot of articles and best practices. So if you haven't been able to visit it yet, or you didn't know it was out there, we do have a COVID-19 resource center. We will be sending out these slides after the event today, and you'll have these links to both our resource center, which has links to all of the articles, as well as our product page. And so if you're interested in either our adaptive insights, or you need some help with anything else related to COVID-19, like our assistance with the PPP or SBA loans, which this is not covering. We do have all of that up there, and we'd love to help you navigate this unprecedented crisis, because there's just a lot going out there, and there's so much information. It's hard to know what to rely on. So in just a moment, I'm going to hand it over to J Mark to talk about how adaptive can have an impact. We'll look at and talk about kind of some of the revenue modeling. One of the things that adaptive is really good at is allowing you to do these what if scenarios. Reporting by various attributes or dimensions, so that you can look at all of your budgeting however you need to for both management, compliance, and regulatory purposes. And also looking at your KPIs. What are your key performance indicators, key ratios, and how you're spending your time and money. All right, but first, a polling question. Back to you, Tracy.
Perfect. Thank you, Brenda. All right, we're on to our second polling question here. All right, what tool are you using for budgeting? Please select one: Excel, Power Plan, a cloud solution, or an on-premise solution. And just as a reminder today, we will be sending out a recording if you joined late of today's webinar with the slides. So if anyone wants to reference those later, you can. All right, let's go ahead and see the results for this. Awesome. So majority are in Excel.
It's about what we expected. It's the most common budgeting tool used by everybody, not just nonprofits. So you're not alone out there. And it's the reason why most people attend a webinar like this, is because Excel is a pain because of all of the version control, multiple people needing to be in there, and then also the privacy of it, because it usually has sensitive data that's not going to be shared amongst different groups. It's usually only finance and HR that has access to everything there. So great.
Thank you, Brenda. And for our next section, I'd like to introduce J. Mark from Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. If you can advance the slide, please. It's still on the polling question. There we go. Awesome. And J. Mark, you're up and you should have control.
You are muted, though.
That may be the problem.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
We can hear you now.
Great.
Good morning.
So, we're in quite a predicament as a world and nation, and I'm just delighted to be able to speak to how Adaptive is helping us to meet this challenge. So I'll begin by just talking a little bit about the challenges we faced prior to adopting Adaptive Insights and how they've come into play now. Like Brenda said, we had a lot of disparate Excel files supporting budget calculations. And let me just level set here, because my organization left Excel quite some time ago for a program called PowerPlan. PowerPlan now is under new ownership, but they continue to be in good partnership with Blackbaud, and we were using Financial Edge. So that was a natural fit for us. It also has a very low hurdle in terms of upfront investment, and it's kind of a lower mid-tier product in my estimation. It does have a powerful staffing model for your payroll and related costs, but the modeling for any other costs or cost allocations, that type of thing, is pretty non-existent. So you're still relying on a lot of spreadsheets to get that done. And, you know, we always wait until after everything else is settled, because a lot of our cost allocations are driven by headcount or FTE and other information in the budget. So it was really an Achilles heel for us in getting the budget ready for the board every year, because we were always conducting those calculations at the 11th hour, trying to push them in quickly, and there was always mistakes. Also, wasting a lot of time when working from home, remoting into the terminal server, because at least our instance of PowerPlan implementation was server-based. I'm not sure whether that product is available as cloud-based system at this point. And the big downside was limited or inflexible visibility into data. So the way our last system worked is you had a view or a screen that you could see the budget at the intersection of different dimensions, like levels or departments, grants or funding sources, and projects, or the tracking of that different activity that we did. And in that system, you could only organize the data to be able to see it either by grant or by project or location in terms of dimensions. So that made it impossible for us to be able to provide directly out of the budget system information to meet the needs of both our development and fundraising colleagues who need to be able to report on how grant funds are being used to individual funders. Because we could either do that, or we could arrange the information by project so that our management team, who manages different projects that span across departments, need that information to be able to manage the costs on the project. So it was kind of one-dimensional in that aspect in terms of how you could view or get visibility into the system. These are things that Adaptive has really solved for us. So we have data integration from a variety of sources, including Sage Intacct, in a more elegant way. There was a connector or a bridge between PowerPlan and Financial Edge, but it took about a half an hour to run, and it had to be manually done. We can also now drill down into our information by any aspect or facet that we have of our dimension. So you can see your data your way. We also have a lot less manual entry because we can build models within the software itself to calculate different costs other than payroll, as well as revenue. So really powerful modeling that can be built to the specifications that you need for your entity. One really big win in terms of a change in our experience moving to adaptive is that you can make adjustments and then see the results in your plan book or budget book with lightning speed. When we were working in PowerPlan, because we have a large, complex workforce with more than 30 different groups that we work with multiple departments that they manage, and over 400 employees, it would take 45 minutes to make a change in the payroll model and then see the impact on the budget. So really super time consuming. And while that payroll model was cranking through its calculations, your screen was entirely locked up and you couldn't do anything else in the budget system. You just have to let it sit and wait and wait and wait. And we would always imagine Jeopardy music playing in our head while we were doing that. And then you had to move on to other things. And then your report might be done, and then you'd have an interruption in your day because you got a call or something, and getting back to it in time can sometimes be a problem. So just being able to access the information with the right level of speed and accessibility was something that's really solved with adaptive. So with that, what I'd really like to do is talk about the case for building a bridge. I think you all will understand all of this, but I just want to talk about the sequence of our events and our experience. So on March 14th, the Bay Area shelter-in-place order went into effect. That meant that we closed down not only all of our traditional nonprofit offerings like community events, youth leadership programs, and things like that. We also had to stop wildlife conservation, habitat restoration work, and all of that. And most importantly for the Conservancy, which relies on 80% of its operating budget from the revenue derived from our visitor centers and our tours on Alcatraz, a devastating blow. Now, at that time, we didn't know how long this would go on, and we thought it might be a shorter time frame. But certainly, by March 20th, when California issued its stay-at-home order, it became clear that this is going to be a more enduring scenario for us, and we need to really act quickly to think about what is our new financial reality and how can we continue to stay living within our means. As nonprofits, we have to have business models or employee business models that allow us to create value, put it forth into the world or universe in terms of program outcomes and mission achievement, but also capture some of that in terms of financial value to reinvest in our infrastructures, program development, outreach, and expansion to meet the ever-increasing needs of our audiences and beneficiaries. So we began running a new zero-based budget approach for the period from April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021, with the goal of coming up with a budget that would allow us to spend within our means. On April 2nd, we had a special board session to approve this new reforecast spending plan. And I'll show you the architecture of that, but it's not a typically GAAP plan that we put before the board. It was more cash-based, but not a true cash flow forecast. Let's go to the next slide. So let me talk about how the different attributes and things that adaptive can do for you from a calculation and processing and modeling perspective. The revenue planning is super flexible. It does take some time and investment to build the models, but basically any calculation that you can put in a spreadsheet, you can build into the adaptive model. The real benefit of this is now we don't have to worry about do we have the right spreadsheet to support the budget, and are we using the right information? So keeping all that aligned with version control is something you really don't have to worry about in adaptive. You build the revenue and expense models for each version of the budget that you're planning for your different scenarios, and it's always there. You don't have to comb through virtual files of Excel spreadsheets wondering which one really is the final. This is also going to come in very handy as we look at scenario planning as soon as we get some information down the road about potential reopenings and what that could look like. We're expecting that with social distancing guidelines that we will have to rethink and reimagine how we deliver our programs and services, particularly with our Cell House tour. We're going to have to look at things that we need to do to manage the queues, the number of people in groups, the capacity of the ferries going to the island is going to be diminished, and we're going to need this tool to actively investigate what's possible. Because if we can only take 50 people over in a ferry at a time, we will lose money operating the tour, and so that would be a no-go. So we're going to be using this very robust planning tool even more as we move forward. One of the great things I think that really is the magic bullet here is we can achieve a 360-degree view into our data. And what I mean by that is you can see your data organized by any dimension. So here is a typical view of what your budget normally looks like. You've got accounts arranged down the column on the left for the rows, and you've got time periods across the top. Here, I've also drilled down into a specific grant, and this is a granting program that we do for the Park Service. And the reason it's a grant in our books is we often deploy this grant funding for them. So it's more of a fiscal sponsorship model where we provide reports to them showing their money that they're getting for us. And so we have other accounts that show up in those reports for the grant award. And it looks like so the grants made area is really what we're giving to them, and we're planning our budget. Now, in our last budget system, there was no way for me to easily be able to see what these grants made are being used for. And so I'm going to show you what the cube looks like if you pivot it to be able to break out. Now, this grants made account, I can pivot the cube to see what's underneath along any line of dimension. So I can see grants made by grant, grants made by project, that type of thing, or location. So when I do that, now I'm looking at the account grants made, and it's now broken out by project. So this shows the distribution of how the interpretation division of the Park Service is going to use the money that we're granting them. And we keep track of what different divisions or departments within their team this goes to. And we're doing it, we don't keep their departments like ours, we use project codes for their departments. So this shows how we're distributing the money across their different departments so that they know how to deploy the money by their different work groups. This is probably one of my favorite aspects, and I sure hope that we see this when we do the demo. The other
No
thing
pressure there, J-Mark, thanks.
So, and the other awesome thing, and particularly if you have moved to a product like Intact, is we have dimensions and dimension attributes. So just to explain the way we present information to our board and the way we've trained them to think about managing finances is the way we work internally too. So although expenses on a GAAP basis in your audit are always going to be unrestricted, it's very important for us to understand what funding sources are paying for those expenses. And here we're still using the term unrestricted instead of without vendor restrictions, but they are really one and the same. Unrestricted is just shorter. And so we track by 3 broad funding types: unrestricted, or designated, and donor restricted. And in particular, for this exercise we're running now, we need to be able to understand what payroll costs are paid by different funding sources, because now it's about sustainability and understanding which of those funding sources is going to continue to stay with us during this unusual period where we're having to operate in a shelter-in-place mode. So we're having to go through all of our expenses and identify those for which we have funding that can pay for those expenses moving forward, and those expenses that are going to be uncovered that we either need to mitigate by curtailing and stopping the spending, or identifying new funding sources or reallocating existing funding sources. So on the left, I've filtered it for without donor restrictions. You can see the satisfaction of program restrictions at the top to match the expenses that are being covered with the relief. This is also a great way to be able to quantify or measure the sustainability of each of your programs. And you do have to do your bookkeeping and your journal entries a certain way to accomplish this. But basically, how we accomplish this is we have a grant ID that's required for every transaction, and it tells us the funding source. Each of those grant IDs can be assigned an attribute that's either donor restricted or designated or without donor restriction in our instance. And so we can produce a normal GAAP presentation that's stacked, that shows all the expenses of unrestricted, all of the unrestricted revenues, the release from restrictions, and so forth, just like a GAAP presentation. Or we can break them out separately to understand the financial dynamics that are powering each of those expense models. Adaptive also caters to our nonprofit needs for cost allocations. One of our huge pain points, my slide before talked about the mind-numbing calculations. We've got so many different disparate work groups and business models going on, from our traditional nonprofit models that rely on philanthropy and government grant resources to our entrepreneurial programs like the Alcatraz tours and our interpretive retail at our visitor centers that generate huge amounts normally of revenue that is without donor restrictions because it's earned, and a lot of that revenue fuels the rest of the nonprofit programs that we do. We also have large habitat restoration and construction projects for park building, like the design and construction of features in parks like visitor centers, overlooks, trails, and things like that. We also use vehicles. We have GSA leases. We have a fleet that's partially owned. We need to allocate based on how the costs come in. So, for instance, we have buildings that we have utility costs for, and we have to look at those costs the way they come in and then allocate them out based on the usage. The allocation pane is really easy here because we can actually set up direct cost entry screens or sheets within the model. We populate the direct costs. We upload the percentages that have been calculated based on the bases like FTE within the facility or square footage. The model calculates the allocations and then populates not only the direct expense in the IT or facilities department, depending on the nature of the cost, it also goes and allocates it out into the allocation account. So you don't have to run a spreadsheet and then do a lot of data entry with a lot of opportunity for errors. We also have detailed personnel assumptions. Here, I'd just like to show you that how the personnel sheet works. And if you have staff that work across multiple funding sources, like here, we have a staff who's in multiple departments and also has different funding sources. So you can keep it all in one place. The model calculates and distributes all of the cost amounts appropriately, and everybody gets to see what their cost of doing business is. Reporting is super flexible. You can get your data out your way. You can organize it however you want it, filter it, pivot it. It's all great. And here's where we were going to. This is what we presented to our board last week. It's a different type of budget. We started out with our cash on hand. We're liquidating some of our investments in our long-term portfolio to provide for liquidity. We've identified what program income will continue, we're looking at what contributed income we can confirm that's going to continue to be available, our government grants, and our other income. We're also looking at borrowing from SBA and PPP loans and potentially expanding our line of credit. So this is how we get to a new spending authority level, or the budget envelope that the board sets for us to work within. Here is an idea of what happened to our profile of revenues and expenses. So you can see that the investment draw, cash on hand, borrowings, those are now a very significant portion of our budget, and they didn't even exist before. You can see that our program income went from 80% to 4%. So our business model has really been flipped on our head, and our budget is now, the reforecast is about a little less than 50% of what our previous budget was. But we feel that it's something that we can realistically live within and get through to the other side, reopen, and hopefully being even stronger for this with new models of service delivery and so forth. And really it's about maintaining board confidence, keeping it, and then activating to move forward. So I'll just leave off here with just restating that, you know, there's proven functionality, especially for working remotely. You can access things from anywhere. And I think I want to leave enough time for questions in the demo. So I'll stop right here.
Awesome, J. Mark. That was great. We really appreciate your input on this. Really great stuff. So now we're on to polling question number 3. What are your biggest budgeting and reporting challenges? Select all that apply. Funding uncertainty, donor reporting, rising labor costs, disruptive environment, affordability.
And just as a reminder, if you are looking to get CPE credit, you do have to answer 75% of these questions. So if you missed one, make sure you get answers in on this one.
Thank you, Brenda.
Luckily, there's no wrong answer.
All right, and we'll see the results. All right, 67% on funding uncertainty.
I'm glad to see donor reporting is kind of towards the bottom, because I know that I've talked to a lot of our private foundation clients in the last couple of weeks, and they are easing up on some of their requirements. Hopefully you all are experiencing that as well. Labor costs in most markets, they're rising, but of course in this market, people are unfortunately looking at the opposite, more like furloughs and reductions, rollbacks of bonuses and cost of living increases that may have been given out at the beginning of the year. So definitely the most disruptive thing most of us have seen in our lifetimes, which creates, you know, that uncertainty there. So.
Great, thanks, Brenda. And next we have Amy on to the Adaptive Insights nonprofit demo.
Okay, and will it pop up for me to go ahead and share my screen? There it is. We'll see if I get it right the first time.
Awesome, we can hear you and see your screen.
Okay, that's a twofer. So this won't be a full demo of Adaptive, but just to highlight some of the capabilities that J. Mark referred to and some of the most common things that we get questions on. The first is, you know, as you're looking at your financials, Adaptive has some incredibly powerful dashboards, which just real time immediately reflect the data you have in the system. This has been especially helpful recently as people are running what if scenarios and wanting to compare version to version. And then just one example of how we typically see people interacting with these is, you know, right here I've got some anomaly data showing up with my travel expenses popping up. And I could just go ahead, click on that anomaly, drill in, and then see, you know, right away that, see, Tracy, it's the marketing department. The marketing department charged a $10,000 lunch to my department. Now I can go and you know, pop this into Excel, send off an email and say, you know, hey, what's the story with this? So it allows people to, you know, again, interact with data visually and go ahead and drill through and get to that information as quick as possible. For my friends in finance, the waterfall just tends to be the favorite, where you're wanting to see that comparison version to version and break it down. So sometimes we'll see that breakdown like this by account or account grouping, and you can see where that unfavorability came in and is broken down that way. Or we've also seen this between versions of rounds of budget or rounds of what if scenarios. You can break it out by department and see what departments, what part of the organization are most impacted. We've been talking a lot about versions and adaptive. If you think of versions in Excel land, it's kind of like doing a save as on your spreadsheet. So just wanted to, you know, in a demo model here, show you that, you know, we've got one version of the truth, that's your actuals, and then we can have different versions of budgets or even bring in various what if scenarios, and you're basically doing a save as of your versions, and then you can change some of the different either drivers or just, you know, data itself in those what if scenarios. So in this case, I'm in a forecasted scenario. I mentioned we have one version of the truth, one version of actuals, and adaptive always shows those in green, so kind of a nice visual indicator of what you're looking at. So in this case, I've got actual data in here through March, and then I'm forecasting out the balance of the year, so forecasting out April onward. In here, we also see, well, if I scroll down to it, we would see it. Oh, I popped up, so we're not actually looking at that. In this case, I've got a statement of activities. In the demo here, it's not quite as fancy as what JMark actually has built up in his, but we're showing the organization with their full chart of accounts by program. So in this case, if I'm looking at program 1000, just to show you what some of that navigation looks like, if let's say I wanted to see what my contributions were by program, I can just click and drag this. So if you're a big pivot table fan, you'll probably find this pretty intuitive. But now I can look at those contributions and I can see them broken out by my different programs. And then one last piece I wanted to show is, as we mentioned, there's typically a lot of board reporting responsibilities you have, and you want those reports to look nice and polished. So Adaptive has a capability called Office Connect. And with Office Connect, we can basically set up links within the cells to pull the data straight from Adaptive. So in this case, this 60 that I'm looking at is getting sourced by coming from this particular account. In this case, it's October, so looking at October. And so you can kind of see all the different pieces that are pulling that piece of data. So the setup is fairly simple. And then here in Adaptive, if we wanted to go ahead and bring in another month of actuals and then have this sheet reflect that, all I need to do is change the date in one place, click refresh, and I don't have April actuals yet. When I do have them in, they'll pop right in. You'll see that the dates all just shifted automatically. This used to say October, now it says November. Let me flip back, I'll pull February's. So all I do is change the date to February, hit refresh, and now I've got my financials through February. What this allows you to do is, again, keep all those beautifully formatted reports that you already have. You don't need to recreate anything. All that energy, those thousands of hours that were spent kind of developing that over time is preserved, and we just simply add links in here to pull that for information from Adaptive. So those were just a few highlights I wanted to show you within Adaptive itself. I know we've got the luxury of having JMark here as well, so would welcome any questions, especially getting specific to what JMark has seen or anything in the demo, unless Tracy, you jump in and tell me there's another polling question.
There is another polling question, so we'll continue with that and then go on to a Q&A. Thank you, Amy.
You bet.
All right, so our final polling question of the day. Has your organization implemented rolling forecasts? Please select one. Yes, no, we are interested but not currently doing it. And just as a reminder for everybody, we will be sending out the webinar within 48 hours. You'll see an email from us. If you are getting CPE, you'll get an email after you complete the survey with your CPE accreditation. All right, and let's see the results here. All right, almost evenly around the board there.
What we're seeing is something similar to what we saw in the financial crisis in 2008, and that is a lot of folks who maybe weren't doing very frequent forecasting suddenly were, and nowadays, like was mentioned earlier, a lot of the budgets that you had that seemed like great plans just 2 months ago are out the window, and so we're finding a much bigger need to be not only doing a forecast for now in the COVID-19 world, but probably needing to do those much more frequently coming up as well.
Thank you, Amy.
Tracy, do you have any Q&A for us?
Yeah, I do have a few here. First question I have is, do you have anything related specifically to risk management during COVID-19? Their audit committee has asked for them to analyze.
So, I mean, I would say that everything related to COVID-19 is risk management and risk analysis, because it depends on what your specific risks are. And they're going to fall into different areas. You know, there's risks related to cybersecurity, having a remote workforce, having these devices connected to your network, having programs. Zoom these days has been all over the news. And so there's all kinds of risks there. There's also, you've got funding risks, things that you thought were guaranteed might not be coming through, or they might have a different timing. And so I think the first step in that would be to do a risk analysis, a risk assessment to assess where your risks are as an organization, and then from there, kind of start coming up with mitigation or prevention strategies. And if you'd like some help with that, whoever asked that question, please do reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk that through with you.
Yes, and certainly everybody's having to respond to these risks, and there's an impact financially. So Adaptive is a great way of quantifying as those measures become known. You can try to get estimates of what the cost or related cost impacts are going to be, and then plan that forward in your models. So this is about also understanding how your business model needs to change in response to those risks and what that means for financial stewardship.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. I have another question here. I want to plan my whole statement of activities, not just my GL, but by program. Can I do that with Adaptive?
Yeah, so in the demo, I started highlighting that we can actually plan the full GL, again, not just by, with the GL and the departments, but actually being able to break things out. In the demo, it was by program, and I think JMark had his by funding source and project as well. So we'd work with you on defining exactly how you need to slice and dice things, make sure we understand what your needs are before going in and actually putting something together where, because everybody does have unique needs.
And that's where the dimensions come into play. So if you can identify what those needs are, the system is so powerful that you can see your data arranged by any dimension that's important to you, whether that's location, project, grant, you name it, you can create it in Adaptive.
Anything else, Tracy? Tracy?
She's on mute.
Definitely was on mute. Thank you. Sorry about that. So another one here, I need to see my financials by program and funding source. How do you do that? To drill into transactions, do I have to use a graph?
Do you have to use a graph? No. Let me show a couple other ways of getting at data. Can I do a share screen again? Okay, can you see my my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks. So actually, typically, the people who are going to be in dashboards are, more your C-level or people kind of coming in from that high-level view, VPs. And maybe once in a while you have budget owners coming in and looking at their information. But typically when they're doing their variance report, they're more of this type environment. So here's my variance report. I've got indicators saying, hey, you need to explain this. And of course, it's a demo, so we've got some weird data in here. But that same number I saw spike, I also just see naturally in my variance report. And so I can, drill the right way. And once I say drill into transactions, again, it's the same data set. Adaptive just has another way at that information. And then I could also see it if I'm just, on my regular statement of activities. So in this case, the travel expenses, if I'm coming in and I'm doing my forecast, hold on, Amy. I might be down here in Department 1. Now I'm really hoping there once I had that travel bump. Good. So here I can see I've got that travel anomaly. I go, oh boy, I need to look at that. Oh, hold on, they added something. I can drill straight into transactions. Good job, Adaptive. So here I can go straight into transactions and look at that while I'm trying to do my forecast. And then I can go, well, based on this information, maybe I update, what I'm going to put in for the rest of the months. So I can change my forecast. So if I'm coming in and reforecasting, I still have that drill into transactions capability. Tracy, do you think that answers the question?
Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Anything else from our presenters? If not, I'll wrap it up here with a few minutes left.
I'm all set.
Oh, all right, cool. Well, thank you, everyone, our presenters and our audience. That was amazing content. If you guys have any other questions, the contact information is on the slides. Feel free to reach out to our team. Remember to look out for the recording that's going to be sent to you, especially for CPE people. And don't forget to take that quick survey for our L&D team to get back to you. So with that, wraps it up. Thank you, J Mark, Amy, Brenda, Chris, everyone on the online, and we hope you have a great week.
Stay healthy, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.